Good morning to all of our technology leaders out in our school districts, all of our technology partners that are joining us today. Mike Lettingham here. David Couch is unable to join us this morning. He had a family situation that he needed to deal with unexpectedly, so he won't be joining us today. So you'll have myself, Marty Parks here today, Chuck Austin, Phil Coleman, and then Dee Parker. Wow, that right there.
That ought to fire Twitter up across the state. What do you think, Marty?
There's something going on. Dee Connor and Bob Hackworth also will be joining in. So yeah, that's an interesting situation. Got Go Soapbox up, so be sure and put any topics, questions, discussion items up there. We've got the agenda that was sent out, and we will pretty much go through that pretty much straightforward and cover the different topics. But certainly, if you all have things that you need us to try to address that we don't have on there, make sure you bring those to our attention. Last month, we mentioned that one of the things upcoming was our operations plan and our technology needs report that we are required to submit to the state board every year on behalf of all school districts. These are two things that are required by statute, and without those, we don't have our funding program, and we don't obviously have the overall structure of the program that we have. So we want to go over that, and I'm going to describe some things. We're going to pull up a little bit of information to talk about, and then we'll just kind of bring up different points that we want to make on those specific areas. So let me just first say we have the technology needs and we have the operations plan. The technology, and these are two different staff notes that get submitted to the state board. The technology needs is what describes, exactly what we have as a need for technology in our K through 12 system. And, that's really driven primarily from the master plan. We have the master plan that defines what our projected technology needs are. And so if you reference and are familiar with the master plan, then you're going to very quickly be able to say, I have a good idea of what makes up these technology needs. Now, what we do is based on the reports that we get each year through the technology activity report and the digital readiness. And it seems like there's one other one I'm not mentioning, but through a variety of things, but those two are primary ones. We established that there is a remaining technology need. Never have not had a technology need since this program started. And I think everybody's familiar with that. We've never been able to say that we've got everything that we need, and we've been able to satisfy all the outstanding items that need to be in services and things that need to be done. So we've always had a gap. So we established that need and we report that to the state board. And there's a staff note that describes that. I'm not going to pull up the staff note and try to walk through that. That will be publicly available. It's not finalized yet. It's still going through reviews. So that will be available, the staff note that describes that. And let me just say, I'm going to get to a point here where I bring something up that kind of brings all these topics together. The technology needs, the operations plan, and then the funding sources that we have available. So Here in just a second, I'll bring something up. So that's one of the items we have to report on, and that need for K through 12 is $366 million, and that's
Annually.
And there's a gap, and I'll kind of speak to this in a minute. But there's a gap between what that need is and what the funding sources that we have available. And again, I'll get to that number right here in a minute. I can't remember it off the top of my head, but it's about $100 million gap that we have between the technology need and what we're able to identify as available funding sources.
And Mike, you always do a great job of thinking through and talking through what that projection, why it's a projected need, right?
Well, you're talking about the master plan need. Yeah, obviously we've traditionally from the beginning of the program had calculations that we've used based on the average daily attendance, number of students, based on staff, based on number of buildings, a variety of factors, based on the average price that we're able to identify associated to different products and services, and project that this is what's need to be maintained in order to have a reliable technology program addressing all the different areas that we address. And so some of those areas are going to be again, addressed more equally to what those projections are.
We'll get closer to that.
Some we actually, and some of this is dependent upon the individual school district, will go over on some of those items slightly, not as much. And then obviously the gap is where we're not able to meet what those needs are. And some of those are projections that we have to use the best information we have. We get into a lot of that when we talk about the instructional materials and things like that. A lot of those, it's hard to predict what those are. So we've got, projections out there that give us a target, and we refine that as we need to. So when we talk about specific, and again, today we're not going to go through that line by line. When we went over the master plan, we've done that. Obviously, the KEs have the ability to address questions specifically if somebody's looking at the master plan and all the different line items and say, I need to understand better what this is. So we certainly would address and respond to any questions either directly to us. Certainly, if you have a specific question, you can address it now. But one-on-one through the KEs, or you can certainly contact one of us as well if you have specific questions about the line items that make up the technology needs report.
Well, and Mike, and to that point, you made a good statement just a while ago. As always, they're all good statements, just so you'll know.
Okay.
But when we talk about the technology need, we've really tried to figure out and project, key word there, total cost of ownership on an annual basis, okay, of what it takes to support what I'm going to refer to as the set of baseline components for education technology across the state. And it's primarily, it's people, it's stuff, it's services, and it's not all inclusive. That's a conversation I know we've had before. We know that there are other things, all right, that people have to spend money on that are technology related. But I think it's important to recognize, Mike, the statement you made earlier that we've always had a technology need. We always will have a technology need, because it's not just the initial implementation of the stuff, of the hardware, it's the replacement based on the life cycle of whatever those components fall into. So when you think about it, and we all know this as technology leaders, every year there's a replacement cycle we're going through for something, and you've got to account for that, okay, as a need, as well as the annual ongoing costs for people and utility services and things like that. So you're right, Mike. I mean, we really try and project at a baseline level, this is what it costs the Commonwealth to sustain a technology program. And then based on what we're able to capture, that quite frankly, the efforts at the local level from our EdTech leaders, with the digital readiness survey and with the TAR report and with some other things.
Our feedback report as
and
well.
Our feedback report and our technology plans and the trends that we see come out of that, that allows us to really target and see, okay, how close are we coming to meeting that goal? And the $100 million you mentioned just a while ago, that's pretty well a standing gap that we've got every year. That another point I want to make that you and I have talked about over the years, just kind of rolls into the next year. All right, so really and truly that $100 million delta, all right, if you don't address it this year, it's just one additional pot of money that you're trying to find or needs that you're trying to address the following year, and it just keeps exponentially growing. So we've always got an unmet need, but I wanted to throw that out there.
Well, not addressing that gap causes us to be dealing with some easy examples is older equipment in some instances, and we may need to or want to. It a lot of times the biggest hit that we get by having that gap that we're not able to address is that means that there's unserved needs. There's students that haven't had the access they need, and when I say access, I'm not talking about internet necessarily, because we have pretty good solid internet capability as far as, but when it comes to all the different components and things that go along with that. So basically, when every year you're not able to address that, you can kind of look at it and say, well, does that number keep building on itself? Somewhat it does, but a lot of it is just lost opportunity. And so I think it's important for folks to understand that as well.
One more plug that if I could make, that I think really just fits tightly into this conversation at this point in the year is that for the first time ever, our district technology plans are well aligned with our KETS master plan.
Absolutely.
Right? And so we do likely have a few new EdTech leaders that this may be their first Webcast joining with us, right? So newly hired CIOs, and EdTech leaders that we have across the state. So for the first time ever, we have a tight alignment between our district level technology planning, which also helps feed our need identifications and helps feed that understanding of the gap between what we're actually spending on operational needs and
Correct.
the projection.
That's correct.
And we also have to take into account emerging technology.
Right
Some
on.
we know about.
Absolutely.
Some we don't.
Yeah.
New stuff that's coming on that, do we have to account for that influences that gap.
So, and again, we'll revisit the specifics of the technology needs as part of the illustration we'll bring up in a minute somewhat. But I want to shift to the operations plan, which is the other part that we submit to the state board every year for review and approval. And the operations plan, it really is just that. You've heard us refer to it as an expenditure plan as well. It is what lays out what are we going to do, how are we going to spend the allocations of funds that we have available to put forth on behalf of all K through 12 schools. So we have a KETS allocation of $15.4 million, and so we'll speak to in just a minute. I'll reference the slide that A&E brought up. And so we have the $15.4 million of our KETS funds. We have our allocation for our internet connectivity for the Kentucky Education Network. We have some other funds that are specifically identified, which we'll hit on when we go through that. So that's a separate staff note, separate report basically that we submit to the state board. Both of those are in kind of close to finalized draft format right now, being reviewed by the commissioner's office and some others to be finalized and then submitted to the state board for the state board meeting that will occur on August the 7th, I think it is. So the first week or so in August is the date for that. So, Andy or Megan, whichever one of you all brought that up, I apologize. So let's walk through this because, again, I think this certainly illustrates the budget process that we do as part of the operations plan. It also identifies the different funding sources that we identify as available, and again, therefore ties into how it addresses the technology need that we have. So this first section here is the KETS allocation, $15.4 million, and this anybody that's been around this should look very, very familiar to you because we've used this format for a good while. So the first section that we break those funds down into is instructional and administrative software maintenance licenses. And that's $1.9 million. And again, you can see it on there, and we will provide these as attachments as they're more close to finalized. We'll be sending these out and making those available. But so that's financial management system, virus protection, student teacher technology, usage analytics, which is Brightbytes, Microsoft networking licensing. And there's a few other little things in there, but we mainly highlight the big ticket items that are in that category. The second category is instructional and administrative systems operations and maintenance services. And we've got help desk services in there. We've got customer relationship and resource management, which is our KETS field staff, student technology leadership, digital learning coach services. So those things are all kind of bundled up in that particular category, which is $5.6 million. And keep in mind, as I'm identifying these particular categories here, those are things that are made available on behalf of each and every K through 12 school in Kentucky. And then the third category is our administrative systems operations and maintenance, and that's $2.1 million. School report card, Kentucky Education Placement Service, District Digital Readiness Survey, Student Voice, and Open House are some highlighted items in that particular area. And then the fourth category is our KETS Leadership Planning, Management, Research, and Evaluation, which is $1.6 million. And we have our KETS Engineering Services, KETS Vendor Management, KETS Planning, KETS Product Testing and Evaluation, and KETS Project Management things that are bundled in there. So there's a variety of things in the details that make those up. And certainly, if anybody has a specific interest or question on those, we're completely fine with addressing those. May or may not be able to get to some of those kind of detailed questions on a particular call like this, but follow up, certainly we can do that through the KEs.
Sure, absolutely.
Or you can contact one of us directly. And then so that adds up to $11.2 million of the 15.4, and then $4.2 million of our KETS allocation is specifically allocated to offers of assistance. And so that's one portion of offers of assistance there. and that's the portion that comes directly out of the KETS allocation from the 15.4.
So Mike, a quick point on
Go
that
ahead.
real quick, and not to chase a rabbit.
No, you're fine.
And it may be something we get into later, but I think it's important. Andy, do you mind bringing that slide back up? That $15.4 million that we're highlighting right there, just a reminder, a decade ago, okay, we had a $19.2 million allocation from the General Assembly, okay? And unfortunately, economic constraints, decision-making, yada, 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 that's been cut multiple times down to 15.4. So I just think it's important for folks to realize that, you know, we work really, really hard, all right, in the face of funding reductions to try and maintain the level of operational services we provide to school districts. We work really hard to keep the offers of assistance as high as we possibly can, in lieu of the fact that that is probably about a, 20% cut that we've experienced in the last decade in regards to the base technology funding mechanism for the program.
So I'll go ahead and speak to one of the things I was going to bring up was the fact that we are going to be submitting a budget increase request. And you all have heard us talk about this previously. I know David's talked about it a few different times. And I will maybe circle back to it here in a minute to more specifically talk about things that we'll be including in that. But for sure, well, maybe go ahead and speak about it right now since you brought it up. I mean, you know, we're going to target that toward obviously increasing offers of assistance,
Right.
assessment, the assessment program, the online assessment program and assessment overall will be a driving factor for that. And then the continuing to address our bandwidth requirements will be a part of that. And then a big part of that budget request also will be around our digital coaching and those services as well.
Right,
And you
statewide,
might be able to describe those a little bit more. And keep in mind, you know, we always want to remind folks when we talk about increasing the offers of assistance, sometimes that's the direction that would go toward, you know, schools being able to address digital coaches and
Like the
things of
people
that
side
nature.
of
Yeah.
Overall,
K-12 EdTech, which
absolutely.
we've been speaking to quite a bit.
So, you know, again, so that is something we'll be doing. It's, again, I was gonna circle back to that, still may a little bit here in a minute, but let's go ahead. Is there something? Okay, I thought you were looking like we got something going on up there. All right, so scroll on down through there for me, guys. So we'll go through these additional categories that are beyond the KETS allocation. So I'm just going to kind of read through these. I'm going to try to avoid reading word for word. I know nobody really wants us to do that. But by the same token, in order to hit on each one of them, I'm going to have to say a little bit here. So we have the IT Academy, Microsoft Imagine Academy, and that's $750,000. And that's a specific allocation of funds that goes toward that program.
And our in this upcoming year, that's been rebranded as our Computer Science and IT Academy, officially dropping the former identification of it.
So then we have our federal E-rate program refunds and rebates. And again, I think it's always worth reminding folks, we get a significant dollar amount back from the federal government through the E-rate program. All of our internet access that we provide on behalf of all school districts results in a refund coming back to the state of Kentucky. And that's always around $12 million based on our current spending pattern. And so we break that into a few different categories of how those funds are used. A big portion, $8.8 million, goes back out to school districts in offers of assistance. So that's a huge impact in us being able to maintain the level of offers of assistance that we've been able to do. We have additional amount that goes toward the internet access for all school districts, so that helps supplement the funds that we get specifically for our internet access and connectivity to all school districts. We have some technology infrastructure updates that there's a variety of small things that are in there. That's $0.4 million. We have funding that is up to now has continued to go toward the student information system of $1.5 million. And then we have our administration and some different related activities associated to managing the E-rate program, which is $0.2 million out of that. So that's how we basically plan to utilize those E-rate dollars that come back into the state. We have a contingency fund that is basically a carryover of $1 million. We've been fortunate to not have to hit on our contingency fund. Once in a while, we've had to dip in it just a little bit, mainly just as a readily available funding source, and then put the funds back into it. But we maintain a $1 million contingency fund for the unknowns. We have interest that we gain on our funding, our accounts that we have where our dollars reside at. And that's, that has thankfully increased back up. We went through a period of time where that got really low, but now it does have a measurable amount of dollars that we're getting back in interest, which is projected to be about $500,000. Those funds really are directly tied back into offers of assistance. And we probably need to note that on our slide there, but those funds really are specifically targeted to go back to offers of assistance. And then we have the local district funds that are used to match the offers of assistance. Our total offers of assistance we're projecting for this year is $13.5 million. That's a combination of the CETS amount for offers of assistance, the E-rate refunds for offers of assistance, and that $500,000. And so equally matched by local school districts by 13.5. Basically, we'll identify $27 million in EdTech funds that are a combination of the offers of assistance and then being matched by the local school districts. That, and just so you know, I'll go ahead and mention it now. I think we even had it as a separate item on the agenda, but it's a pretty quick thing to mention. That equates to a little over $22 per student. So if everything works out, and keep in mind that there are some things in there like the interest rate for whatever reason may not be exactly what we thought it would be, or it may not come in as quickly. Same thing with E-rate refunds. They may not come in as quickly, or they may be a little off. So I've always said safely, I think we'll say $21, but I know I've been asked this question and I've given the range of 19 to 22 as far as for offers of assistance. So I think, safely you can budget and plan in that range. I feel pretty confident in saying that we'll be able to satisfy the 21, but again, safely you would say 19 to 22 as far as what we project for the offers of assistance.
And that's if our projections hold.
Always, everything's contingent upon things all working.
But you and your team, Mike, have been very, very close every year.
Yeah. I feel we usually are able to at this point know if there's going to be things that would really throw things way off track.
But I do want to take a second and talk about Mike Lettingham, the financial consultant. Okay, and I know if Mike looks at me like, "Where are you going with this, Chuck?" So I think it's important for folks to understand. There's a point we've been making for the last couple of years, and I hope folks can at least start to wrap their heads around the fact that when you've sustained budget cuts over a 10-year period, overlaid against the dramatic expansion of technology we've seen in K-12 in the last decade. Yep. I mean, we've moved from a 6-to-1 to a 3-to-1. We're almost to a 1-to-1. Okay, we're right there, aren't we, Marty?
We have more computers in the state than we have students.
We have more computers in the state than students. We've got a lot of people that are involved in providing technology services, but we've got a huge gap still that we've got to address. We've worked really, really hard to keep up with this voracious, very real need for bandwidth growth. But Mike, I label you as a financial consultant because you've been predicting for a couple of years now that unless something dramatic happens, we're going to get to a point where sustaining that $19 to $22 offer of assistance becomes really, 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 really difficult. And to be honest with you, when you look at the basis for the funding increase that we're going to be moving forward with, what we're starting to project is, and David loves to frame this up, is about every 6 to 8 years. There's a crisis moment that we hit across the Commonwealth with CETS. That's what some of the bandwidth upgrades we've had over the years. The IDU project from several years ago was based on that. When you look at the emphasis of online testing that we're going to be placed, as Kentucky right now is looked at as a leader, when you look at the need for the people that we've got to wrap around the program, we've got to secure some additional funding. And we're going to be talking more about that later, maybe not today, but over the next couple of months, where we're going to need our EdTech leaders to help us with that. But Mike, it's just a pat on the back for you because I know you do a really good job of looking at these trends every single year and looking at the expenditures and looking at how we manage all these funding sources. But at the same time going, okay, guys, we're going to get to a point where it gets really difficult to continue making some of these moves.
Well, and obviously there's a team of people that contribute to us being able to stay on top of this and have kept ourselves from getting into where we run into the wall or go over the cliff.
There
I
you go.
always describe that we're always subject to run into the wall or go over the cliff when it comes to being able to have the funds to be able to do the things we need to do.
Right.
So there's a team of folks that's been able to continue to be creative and insightful on how to make sure that we cover that. Now, Marty, you were pointing on some
Yep.
things there, and I think we can we're going to bring both those up here in
Yep.
just a minute, the infographic
and
and then we're going to bring the timeline as well. Those are two additional things that we present to the board. So let's circle back to.
Yep.
I think you were pointing at the offers and the
Yeah.
trend of the offers there, and that's something we can point out when we
Yep.
bring it up
Good.
on there. So let's go back to where we were with this so we can get through this slide that we have up here. So we have local district contribution of 13.5 to match the offers. And then we have our participation in the E-rate program at the local district level that projected on the last year was $15.6 million. We always try to project that on the previous year. It goes up and down depending on what's going on, where people are at in the cycle of replacing stuff, and obviously it will be impacted this coming year by the influx of people applying based on where they were in the 5-year budget cycle for the federal E-rate program.
Category 2 stuff.
The Category 2 stuff, which we'll circle back to here in a minute and talk about that specifically. And then we have our K through 12 internet access program. We'll refer to it as a Kentucky Education Network. We'll refer to it as our K through 12 internet access. And so that's a specific allocation of funds of $17.3 million. It goes toward the cost of connectivity and internet access, as well as several infrastructure components that are required to make that happen as a whole. And that again, I'm not going to read through the details of that statement there, but that's another specific category. All right, go ahead and scroll on down, if you would. Then we have our school facilities funds contribution, which is a projection of dollars that contribute toward technology related items through facility construction projects of $15 million. And then we have this next category is one where you have a lot of different program areas, and this has been an ongoing effort that we've had to try to get a handle on. And again, this is a projection of dollars that are associated to other program areas in the department that go toward technology type stuff. And so we've got a lot of effort that goes in behind this in the details and so forth that allows us to come up with approximately $14.8 million comes from other associated program dollars that are being spent and contribute toward technology related items. And then, so that totals up, all of those things that were above there total up to $105.9 million. And then the next dollar is again, a projection and our attempt to capture other funds that are being spent on technology related items that are not being specifically captured through our technology activity report or through our KDE funding programs. And a lot of that is local district activity. And so, that's again a projection that we try to make of the magnitude of other things that are being spent of $161 million. You add those up together and you get $267.5 million. So that is an estimated projection on the dollar amount that we feel is being spent toward technology related products, services, and items in the state of Kentucky for K through 12. And again, I spoke to the gap of about $100 million because our technology need is $366 million. And so you've got a gap of about $100 million that we're not able to identify any kind of a funding source that is available to go toward that. So it's a pretty big gap, but in the grand scheme of things, it's when we're addressing $267 million of 366, we're still able to be making a lot of progress. So.
And Mike, when we look at other verticals, whether it's private industry or
healthcare, whatever,
healthcare, even higher ed,
Yeah.
from an operational plan perspective, the dollars that can go towards that, we're still on the lower end of that range of the amount of dollars going towards overall budgeting.
You're talking about percentage of overall dollars.
Percentage of overall.
Yeah, we have a less than, in the industry, you'll see 6%, 8% percentage of overall budgets going toward technology-related items, and ours, I think, is 4% or less.
Yep.
That we have going toward
Well, correct
technology-related
me if
items.
I'm wrong, I think our projected need
Yeah.
is at the 4% level. I think what we're actually able
Yeah.
to
That's
meet
correct.
is probably more aligned with 3%.
Yeah, I think you're, yeah, that's right.
Absolutely.
That's
Yep.
correct.
So that is an important point, because, you know, a lot of times we'll get asked the question, and I'm sure districts do as well, and our partners, about, you know, what are we doing with all this money, and it's good to remind folks a lot of times that if you look at a comparison of the industry averages, we're spending less percentage of overall spend for K through 12 education on technology than what you would see in other industries, if you would.
And I think one of the driving points that we love to really jointly across the state with our district leaders together is to push on, you know, that we are very frugal,
Okay.
and we're stretching the dollars as far as they can go with all of our shared services and with our funding strategies. And so we're able to maximize, and the kind of the phrasing that we're starting to use a lot is maximizing the effective use of the technology, right? And so we're able to stretch those dollars as much as possible.
Well,
bring it
the whole money conversation, and we recognize that we've got our EdTech leaders, while we're all doing the same thing with the same stuff to some degree, we've got other folks we know that maybe aren't as involved on the financial side
Right.
at the local level. We spend a lot of time and a lot of effort, and we've got some very talented folks that stay on top of the money side of this conversation daily. You know, we still, to this day, are one of the only states, if not the only state, that has a funding mechanism that drives a statewide funding program.
Right.
Okay, which is awesome.
Definitely the only one that has at the success level that we've had. And we also should take pride in the fact, and it's similar, you may even kind of said it within what you all said, was we have a handle on, I mean, we're able to represent the dollars that are needed and the dollars that are being spent. I want to say more accurately than anyone else is, as far as a K through 12 program, a whole state K through 12 program. I feel like we're able to do that better than anyone else will be able to do.
And one final note, Mike, especially for our new EdTech leaders that maybe are just sitting in those seats for the first time, maybe this year,
Right.
brand new.
Right.
All right, eyes this big around trying to figure all this out. Okay, all of the work that you guys do at the local level. I just cannot emphasize enough, number one, how much we appreciate the effort, the level of accuracy and detail that goes into the digital readiness survey, the technology activity report, because really this is the culminating summary of all that work,
Yep.
of us being able to take that data, those numbers, boil that down with a lot of other data points and funding sources to help get us to the point where we can keep funding the program. So,
Right.
number one, hats off to you as our school district leaders, and we'll always make sure that we emphasize, all right, how important the accuracy of that is, as we're accountable not only at the local level to our communities, but the General Assembly and the taxpayers of Kentucky.
So as part of covering these first three topics on our agenda, I want to mention and bring up a couple other items that we can just kind of talk to some specific points on. Two other things that we'll be providing to the state board. One is our infographic, which provides an illustrated view of a lot of different characteristics and data points associated to our program. And so that is something that absolutely everybody should be very familiar with, is our infographic. And then the other will be our CATS timeline, which provides a lot of historical information, and it's something that we're updating regularly, that talks about accomplishments that we're having on behalf of the K through 12 program as a whole. And you know, a lot of our the way we're presenting where we're at with things is continuing to build on the successes that we've had. And so the timeline is something that really allows us to represent that. So that's going to be a very focal point of our presentations, not only to our state board, but to anybody and everybody about our K through 12 program. So we can bring those up, and any of us can kind of point out some highlights. I'm certainly not going to try to walk through each one of these every line, but the infographic for sure available on our website. People should be familiar with it. I know, Marty, you've got a few points you want to point out on it, and anybody else that wants to point a few things out to our audience.
So again, just a nudge to please get familiar with the infographic. This is something that we've used for the last 5 years now as a narrative, as a storyline to help dig into the key metrics that we're looking at as a state. This is, if you go to our Kentucky Department of Education website, it's embedded and integrated into our KETS master plan under surveys and results. Heavily tied in with our technology activity report as well as our digital readiness report. So at the top, just to point out, and I want to hit just 3 things that are really important to us. Number one, as Chuck mentioned, we now have more student devices in Kentucky than we have students. There's a good conversation piece around there. We do have a handful of districts that still have a much higher ratio, and there's a lot of reasons for that, whether it's tied to the people side of EdTech and understanding that we need people in order to make
and Marty,
the
correct me,
devices
that's
work.
District-owned devices.
Absolutely.
That's not BYOD.
That's
just
absolutely
district-owned.
District-owned devices. And then just to scroll down, we do have an emphasis on greater than 260 kilobits per second per student, and that's bandwidth, average bandwidth available throughout the state. That's an average, which is phenomenal. We push on that quite a bit to really understand that statewide our internet services are just rocking.
Well, and I'll comment on that real quickly because I'm involved all the time in conversations at the national level about how state networks are being ran and how bandwidth allocation is working. And I get in debates quite often because, you'll have a lot of different folks that will talk about they're providing real high bandwidth numbers, but the quality of their bandwidth is terrible. And so one of the things that goes along, not only are we providing an adequate average amount of bandwidth per student, it's quality bandwidth. I like to say it's clean. It functions as it's supposed to. It's readily available and it performs like it's supposed to. And the way our program is set up, we make adjustments to that as needed. We don't over-prescribe just so we can have high numbers showing up on a report. If we do have a need in a particular district based on valid use, valid reasons, we're able to make those adjustments to that connectivity that's being provided. Yep. And so the way our program is set up it's very, not only is it performed very well, it's very responsible. One of the things I love being able to stand up in a room full of other leaders from other states when we're debating this whole topic is to talk about being responsible about how we're doing our program as far as providing internet connectivity.
That's right.
And then we are one of the few that measure the actual user satisfaction.
Adoption and satisfaction.
And so, again, it's something that we should brag on that and be comfortable with that. And obviously, if you guys out there in the school districts ever have, in other words, you would debate or want to say, well, I don't know if we want to know that because we do view that the way we're doing this is being very successful. And so if we have, and we all know we're going to have individual instances of things that you can't control, such as something goes down, equipment goes down, but we're able to respond to those pretty quickly. And again, you're never going to be able to avoid that. You're going to have some instances like that. So it should be minimal. Yeah. That goes back to we want a 99.9999 whatever it is. Phil, you tell me how many nines we want on there, but that's our goal, obviously.
We currently have 3 nines.
Yes,
I want 5, but we get 3.
So anyway, go ahead.
Well, we definitely project a high end of usage or adoption and project of when our districts need that upgrade,
That's
Mike,
right.
as you spoke to. But we're also really looking at the low end of usage. So in
Sure.
other words, we do have some of our districts that we're working with that have extreme availability, but not the usage. And so
Right.
we want to understand that a bit more. One other one, and I'll speed up here, but Andy, you're at the right spot. Home access will continue to be super important for us to understand. We have several different ways to get at that. We're at the time of year where we have student registrations coming in. A lot of districts get the home access that way. We ask this in several different ways, but we really want to increase the number of districts that have a strategic way to know that better. So instead of just guessing, to have a better stat
Correct.
of knowing how many students or the percentage of students who have good home access. So scroll, Andy, and not that the other information is not really interesting and important.
I want to say that all the information on our
Yeah.
infographic is pretty interesting. So, I would encourage folks to become and be very familiar with it, looking at it individually themselves. But
All the way to the bottom, Andy, the last visualization here is, as Mike pointed out, we talked through all the way to the last page, keep going, and where we get to the KETS offers of assistance. Just to point out that we do measure this, keep going, please. There we go. So we do look at our KETS offers of assistance, and we have had some years where we dip, or we've had to dip based on funding availability. We want to keep that pretty high,
Yeah.
right? We want to keep driving that high, that upper end. But I just wanted to point that out, that
Yep.
we do identify that on our infographic as well. So
Yep.
next document that we'll share with our board is our timeline.
And
Yeah.
And before we leave that, I do want to encourage our EdTech leaders.
Uh-huh.
That infographic is available for you to use at the local level.
Absolutely.
Man, because you're a part of this story, okay? When you look at,
The driver of this.
I'll be honest with you, most of the data you submit in the digital readiness survey is what
Yeah.
drives a lot of this, as well as a lot of stuff we do with Bright Bites
Right.
and some other things. But at the end of the day, as you learn, as you tell your own story at the local level
Mm-hmm.
to move the needle, man, use infographics like this to help show that you're a part of this and you're a part of what's making things happen, as well as to basically kind of look around the state and see where you match up and where you fall against what statewide averages look like.
So go ahead and bring up the timeline if you would, Andy and Megan, and you can kind of slowly scroll down through there to get to the latest that we've added to this. This is something we went over pretty extensively during our master plan development and the process of getting it reviewed and approved. So hopefully everybody's familiar with this as a new tool that we have out there. We have made some additions to it recently, which will obviously show up toward the bottom of it at in the last year. So that's something that we're going to continue to update, and we use it aggressively to illustrate progress and things that are going on. And as we were just saying, you guys out in the school districts should use it as well to tell the story of things that are going on.
So
go
I
ahead.
think it's kind of interesting because the infographic kind of tells the story of where we are, and the timeline tells the story of how we got there.
Yep.
And when you kind of look at, a couple of years ago, we said, well, we've got all these, I guess, top hits that we've done, but we've never recorded those. We've never really looked at how did we get there, and so I think that's a really good way to look at it. This is where we are with the infographic, and then this is how we got there.
Yep. And be very forthcoming with feedback on these tools. I mean, because again, we're putting these in place for all of us to be able to use. And I know that there has been a lot of good feedback and input into these, but certainly make sure that you're giving us feedback and input on these tools that we have out there that help continue to represent how, where we are, and where we want to go. I mean, and the ability to be able to move forward. So let me mention a couple other things under these first three categories. One we hit on a little bit was the additional budget request. So we speak to our technology need, we speak to our operations plan for the upcoming year. Went over several things that contribute to that. We've got supporting information that we, showed in a couple of our attachments, being the infographic and our timeline. And so, we will be doing a request for additional funding. And it really goes back to, Chuck, you were just saying just a minute ago, is we need everyone. We had a meeting yesterday with our vendor and partner community, and one of the things that we emphasize with that group is that they need to be a voice out there advocating for the fact that we've got a very successful program here in the state of Kentucky, and we need for it to continue to be a successful program, and we need to continue to grow in order to be able to compete at a global level. And so we need you in the districts doing that as well, you know, with your local legislative leaders and community leaders, and use these tools, speak to, you know, the success we've had in the program, why we need to be able to continue to have funding going toward our program, to continue the success and sustain things as well as to grow things. And again, we'll provide more information on that as we more fully develop the details of that. But I did mention earlier some of the things that we really do see being driving factors for why we need additional funding, being assessment program, which is a high use of technology components, our offers of assistance that we know that we need to continue to increase, our ability to continue to grow our connectivity to the school districts with internet access, and then another category specifically is the people side of things, specifically the digital integration, the use of what we've got, as well as just the people side of keeping things up and going and so forth. And then the last thing I had as a note I want to make sure I mentioned was the offers of assistance that we project for the upcoming year. I already mentioned that, 19 to 22. I think you all can safely plan on that. If you're optimistic, you, I think, can comfortably say 22. If you're not optimistic, I guess you can say 19. But as long as you say somewhere in between there, I'm pretty optimistic in that we'll be able to be 22. But I would probably be safe and say 21. But so anyway, that's kind of where we are. So that's really the first three items we had on the agenda. I know it took a lot of time, but I think that was very critical that we did. Again, to remind folks, we're in the process of submitting that to the state board. State board will be reviewing our operations plan as well as our technology needs in the August board meeting. That's all public information, publicly available. It is required to be reviewed and approved by the state board in order for us to, continue doing what we do. So the state board, I think, is very well in tune with where we are with things. They, recently were presented with our master plan in the last year, and so that provided a lot of insight, because we do have a lot of what we consider to be fairly new state board members when you look at it over a period of time, but they're pretty in tune, so I think they're very well prepared to receive this information and be a part of this process. So
Mike, just in summary real quick, I guess it's kind of an insight into what drives us, what motivates us, within the Office of Education Technology, what we set our priorities around. But, from my perspective, there's three things. There's three things that have got to be your emphasis. There's three things that if you do away with any one of them, your education technology program will fail. And there's three things that we will always work the hardest at, all right, to make sure that we can maximize and continue to grow. Number one is a funding program. Okay, we all know that technology don't happen without money. All right, so you're going to see us really, really continue, as we have always done, to pay a lot of attention to the money, the funding of the program.
In particular, offers of assistance.
Well, it's all funding sources. You know what I
Right.
mean? We've talked about the gap today, and we know we got to keep working toward that. Number two, the network. And when I say the network, the internet, as Marty likes to say.
Yeah.
With our emphasis on cloud, with the need for people to have access to their stuff whenever they want it, the network has to be as solid and reliable and robust and secure as possible. And then the last one, and to me it's a three-legged stool. It's the people. Okay? Without the people,
Well said.
all right, it all fails. So that's why when we talk about additional funding requests, when we talk about everything that we do, it's primarily centered around the money, the network, and the people. It is. So
Bob, you gonna come on up, or are you gonna talk from right there?
There's a camera right here.
So let's go to the next item on the agenda and.
Sounds good. I've got just three real quick items. One, yesterday we had an opportunity to speak with KETS vendors, our KETS vendor partners, and I wanted to make sure that all of our CIOs know that I did talk very briefly about the level of phishing that we've been seeing across the districts and here at KDE, and I warned them and encouraged them to keep an eye out to make sure that the purchase orders that they received were real and not fraudulent, and I also let them know that people were impersonating some of them and were contacting our districts to try to get remittance payments, whatever you want to call it, sent to other locations other than the legitimate vendor. So just kind of keep that in mind, that I have been sharing that with our vendor partners. Second, I've been working with a group of districts on the promised and upcoming password minimum requirements. And again, I want to remind everyone that those are staff only, adult only minimum password requirements for K-12. That's actually going to include KDE as well. We're going to have our own minimum requirements here. We'll be sharing more about that very soon, but not ready to really get into it right at the moment. And then lastly, this is another reminder that by the end of August, and you don't have to wait until the end of August as a district, as a CIO, but by the end of August, August 31st, you have a requirement per 702 KAR 1:170 to acknowledge privately or publicly that you've read through the data breach and security best practice guide and have looked at the data systems that you have in your district, kind of know where your data are, and you've sort of mentioned to your board, where you think your district is. And this is a great opportunity for you to, if you don't feel as though your security is where it needs to be, to talk to your board and your district leadership about what you can do to get better and what the risks are if that doesn't happen. One thing I would encourage you to do is, if you feel as though you're going to be providing information to your board about how unsafe certain systems are or where your weaknesses are, it's probably best not to do that in a public forum, to be honest. And we don't do that publicly with our board either, because if you do that publicly, then essentially anyone who's listening might know where all the weak spots are, and if they want to attack you, they'll know exactly where to go. So again, I want to say this doesn't have to wait until August. We've got a few days left in July. It doesn't have to wait until the very last day in August. So you can go ahead and take care of that anytime between now and then. And I definitely wouldn't be waiting any longer to start if you haven't begun that process. If you have questions, feel free to give me an email or a call, and I'd be happy to walk you through that or give you some ideas on how to get started. So that's it for me, and I'll hand it back to whoever has the talking stick.
So, one of the things I didn't ask when we got done with our first category discussion was, did we have any questions?
We've had a couple questions, Mike, and we've answered those
Okay.
online, and we actually answered them while
Okay.
while speaking, so.
All right, so nothing that we need to?
Not yet.
And again, obviously, anybody can submit those at any given time. And then, obviously, if you had a question on what Bob said, submit that, and we can certainly circle back to that when we see a question pop up. One of the items that we had on the agenda was a thanks out to Woodford County, and it really circles back to something we were talking about earlier, which was at the local district level, making sure that your community is aware of things going on, not only, I guess I want to say both for things that we're doing for K through 12 as a whole for the state of Kentucky, as well as things going on in the local school districts and the local schools. And I'm not real familiar with this particular item as far as what all occurred here. I know David, I think, added this, that he wanted to specifically point out, thanks to Woodford County for highlighting information of things going on. And again, as an example, so thanks to Woodford County, and again, an encouragement for all districts to emphasize successes that are going on. And obviously, we want to say specifically to technology-related things, but the reality is, for education in general, we certainly want to highlight those things. I think everybody tries to do that. I mean, so. Couple things I mentioned, I hit on them earlier. I touched on them. I didn't get into the specifics of was the FCC, the federal E-rate program, and I want to make sure that every district is aware that there are two proposed rulemakings out right now from the FCC. And essentially that is where the FCC provides notification of considerations to make adjustments, changes to the program. And so one of them is, the first one that came out was about the funding level, the funding cap, and it was really about USF, Universal Service Fund programs in general, which there's 4 of them, E-rate being one of them. And there's talk in that proposed rulemaking about combining the E-rate program with the rural health program, and combining those dollars. we have been pretty quick to say that we're concerned about that, as well as other national organizations we're involved in. I think we're hearing a lot of that. So I would encourage you in the districts, as well as our partners, again, we talked about this yesterday when we met with our partners, is to make sure you're familiar with these proposed rulemakings. Provide a response back directly yourself as an organization if you choose to. And then the second thing would be, we're going to be providing a response on behalf of K through 12, Kentucky K through 12, on both of these. And so make sure you get back to us, and I would ask you to do that ideally by the end of the week. And you can do that through your KE. It's kind of ideal to do it through your KE probably, to provide any kind of things, just, points that you keep this in mind. This is something that is, we want to make sure is being considered or thought about that has to do with these proposed rulemaking. So again, the first one was on the funding level and the way the funding program's set up, and it really was talked about the Universal Service Fund overall being the 4 different program areas that are in it, and specifically talked about E-rate and the rural health. The second proposed rulemaking is specifically about the Category 2 funding structure, specifically about the 5-year budget. It really is proposing to adopt that as a way of doing that going forward, as opposed to what was titled under the conditions of a pilot for the first go around of that. And so, as I spoke to several months ago when we were going through the filing process and we were talking about make sure you're doing this filing, we've seen a lot of success in that 5-year budget, and I think it really has allowed the program to kind of be equalized as far as making sure that people have opportunity to gain access to E-rate funding. We've seen that as beneficial for the state of Kentucky. But you as individual districts, certainly provide us with your comments, your thoughts on that one as well. Both of these, if you're going to respond directly to yourself, the first proposed rulemaking has a date for responses to come back by July 26th. The second one, I don't know that a date was identified, but it's typically 30 days from the posting of the proposed rulemaking, and so it will be early August. I don't have a specific
The
date.
first one, did you mean August 26th or July 26th?
July 26th.
Okay.
What did I say?
You said July.
Okay, yeah, July 26th is the first one. What are you looking at that you're questioning something there? That would be the replies back from the
Gotcha.
July 29th. Okay,
July
that's what
29th,
yeah,
yeah.
July 29th. Yeah, I said 26th. July 29th for the first one. The responses back from those from the FCC would be the August date that you're referring to
Yep.
there. So July 29th for the first one, and then the second one I think is going to be a date there in the first week of August. That would if you're replying directly back yourself, as I said, try to have your comments back to us for the K through 12 Kentucky K through 12 as a whole response, which we will share with everyone, but ideally by the end of the week, so that we can work on putting that together and so forth. So again, be familiar with those. Those are a big deal. When the FCC does those proposed rulemakings, the first one is more concerning to me on this one right now because I do have great concern about combining. It's a little selfish, I guess, but I do have, and I'm sure there are reasons they are seeing benefits about trying to combine these funding sources. But when I think about specifically for education technology, I like it that our funding source is separate, and it specifically is going because it does allow more flexibility for people to, make choices that are going to be good for one or the other.
Right.
And again, being selfish, I kind of like it the way it is.
And
But
historically, statewide, we've done really well.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So any
Absolutely.
proposed changes.
yeah. So and then the second one again, the Category 2 funding and the 5-year budget cycle that has really appeared to work well. I think that's a lot of support's coming in that direction. We will be reviewing, providing input as needed into some national organizations that will be commenting on these, such as the Council of Chief State School Officers, the State Education Technology Directors Association, and then the State E-rate Coordinators Association, all 3 of which we're a part of, and so we'll be reviewing those and providing comment as necessary on those. All right, so let me see where we're at here. I want to real quickly on this next one. So, just contract activity. We've mentioned the fact that we've got activity going on the education certification and ethics system. That's part of where EPSB become part of KDE, and we're taking a look at all the associated systems to that, and so we've got activity going on that. Our printer contracts, I think that's well known as far as us sunsetting those contracts. And then the lease reviews, I will hit on that real quick.
Yep.
I mentioned it briefly last webcast, and so we've had a flurry of activity going on around leases, and we've noticed a lot of, I want to say disconnect, I guess is the best way to say it, that is apparent as far as really being on top of the details that are required as part of these leases. One is timeliness. I mean, we've got to have these things submitted to where you're allowing yourself enough lead time to go through the steps in the process to get approved. Now, it's easy for me to say, if everything's perfect on it, then you can expect you might be able to get it returned within about 2 weeks. That's assuming everything's perfect. Never is everything perfect on it. The goal should be that everything's perfect on it. But it's probably an unrealistic goal. There's always going to be something. This goes through a review through our office, through our legal department, through the commissioner's office. And there's quite often just clarification that's needed, if nothing else. But again, the goal should be that everything is as perfect as it can be. So that is something. There's very specific guidelines out there. We brought this conversation also up yesterday with our vendor and partner community about how they can assist to make sure that these things are, that everybody's paying attention to the rules and to the guidelines that are out there. We've had several leases submitted that have already been signed and in place, which is problematic. I can't even really speak to what the consequences may potentially be of those things, because attention's being provided to those situations where leases are going ahead and being put in place before they went through the appropriate process of being submitted and reviewed by the department. So I think people need to understand that that's risky, because and again, how that's going to play out, I can't say. We're having our KE group becoming more involved in the process of leases being submitted to the department.
That's correct.
And you can speak to that if
Sure.
you want.
Well, I think at the end of the day, Mike, I think what you're getting at, and this is just something our EdTech leaders need to know themselves, and quite candidly, from what we've seen in this latest flurry, make sure you're educating the rest of your district leadership. I mean, at the end of the day, there is statute and there's regulation that requires that any lease exceeding $100,000 has to be approved by the Department of Education.
Right.
Okay? Before it's executed, not afterwards, all right? And, to what Mike's saying, we've got some great information that we've updated, we put out on our website. Mike, your staff, Jessica, Melissa, and crew have done a really good job of trying to put together an outline of all that's involved in the process and all that's required and all that's going to be looked at,
Right.
and some recommended best practice of what language needs to be included and parts and pieces and financial analysis, just to smooth line the process. We're going to have the field staff more involved up front, just to make sure districts understand how to navigate that maze, because at the end of the day, we want to turn these things around as quick as possible also. But to your point, there's legal people reviewing things at the local level and at the state level. And never have I met two attorneys that can agree on anything.
Legal and our financial legal.
And our financial, absolutely, absolutely. So at the end of the day, let's make sure we understand, to get out way out in front of these from a timing perspective, to understand all that's required to be submitted, all that's got to be included in terms of additional documentation, business case justification, and all that. Work with your field staff on that process. The field staff will help you engage the rest of our organization, right? But at the end of the day, we got to make sure that these are being approved before you execute. And what we've seen recently is a slew of them that unfortunately you as EdTech leaders have not even been in the loop on, all right? We've got other members of district leadership that are driving these, and we need you to circle that in and try and help us streamline this process. So,
And we'll try to help that as well.
absolutely,
when they
absolutely.
arrive at the department.
Right.
Mike, can you briefly, as we're on contracts and purchasing mechanisms, kind of give us a brief update on the purchasing of phone systems and kind of where we're at with that?
Well, I mentioned this in the last webcast.
Yeah.
In the last webcast, we spoke to the fact that our strategy is going to be to get out of the business of having a product standard and specific contracts, CATS contracts for voice services. and that school districts would have the opportunity to secure their own agreements about how they want to provide voice services, that we will have a very specific set of guidelines and recommendations that districts want to take into consideration as part of securing their voice services going forward. So,
Yeah, I know we had a couple that asked specifically, I guess they missed the webcast last
okay.
time, so.
So bottom line, Mike, correct me if I'm wrong, I mean, we currently have a KIH3 contract that provides for hosted voice for folks that, I think we've got about 11 districts that have utilized that contract for that. We've got some state contracts that have some on-prem hardware that districts can utilize if they want to continue down that path. I think what Mike's getting at is we're going to give districts really the option of using some existing state contracts that are already in place or establishing a local contract for whatever their voice needs. And in conjunction with that, you know, really, if you want to look at voice as just another application on the network, we're going to publish some parameters, some guidelines by which that service needs to play on the network as it relates to firewalls and all that stuff, Phil, that your guys get so intimately involved with. You know what I mean?
Sure,
So,
sure.
did I sum that up right, Mike?
Yeah. So to close out the lease conversation that we were having, you know, we've seen some leases where it's very obvious that some folks did not look at some information that's out there that helps them understand how to check things before those are submitted. So I would say really encourage all your folks that are involved on the leases on the front end to try and look at those things and to make sure they're covered, because those, you know, if everything would be perfect, the quickest we'd probably be able to turn around a lease review is 2 weeks. We're advising that outside of the E-rate season, you should consider at least a month as timeline for a lease. During the planning for E-rate, meaning that you're filing a lease that's going to have E-rate implications and therefore have deadlines that are associated, you need to be 2 months ahead out in front of that.
That's correct.
We shared the same information with our vendor community yesterday, which I've mentioned several times. We had a note on here. We had our vendor meeting, vendor and partner meeting yesterday. Went well, had shared a lot of things. A lot of it's similar things we share on a Webcast, which obviously we point our vendor and partner community to our district Webcast to participate and to know what kind of activities we have going on. But we did have some specific things that we wanted to remind them of as far as doing business with the Commonwealth and a variety of things as well. That conversation went well. Dee Dee, you want to come up here? You want to stay there?
Sit right here.
Okay.
So, just a quick update about the school report card. Yes, it's school report card time. It actually officially opened yesterday. This is the early release for the school safety data. The data has to be verified in the month of July so that KDE can meet its reporting requirements, the Kentucky Center for School Safety and the Office of Education and Accountability. So you should have folks, this information went out to superintendents yesterday. It also went out to safe schools coordinators. There should be people in the districts looking at this data now. And Wendy Newton is still the contact for this data. At the same time that opened, we decided to go ahead and open all the collector items. And the reason we did that is because it gave you more time to actually fill the information in. There are a number of safety precautionary measures. Those are the only ones you can actually see in the card right now as those get populated from the collector tool. But as you go ahead and put the other information in, and one of them is technology. So if you want to get ahead of the game and you've already got your numbers, I would encourage you to go ahead and put those numbers in, because when the principals start loading everything else, they're going to see that piece is done. If you have questions on that, there is information on our cases resource page that provides you information on all the data collector items, what's expected. The KEs are going to be helping this year, kind of help guide that conversation. Ben's going to be our point person to kind of communicate and look at the data and make sure that we feel like we're getting good data up here on that. So do help spread the word on that. Like I said, this period will close July 31st and school safety will be really done. The collector items will stay open through the end of August. Now, part of that collector item is collecting all those items for the school profile report. And that's the 2017 requirement that we have to, every school has to do a school profile report that includes, you know, world languages, health BE, first performing arts, and career studies. So those reports are pulled from the data that you're entering at the school level, and also what we're providing from the state level, which is on the courses and the teachers of those courses. That data will not be loaded until August 7th. August 7th is the date that the non-accountability data will be loaded. It will be available in the card and open to districts to start reviewing. So keep that in mind. That's the next point, to actually have people looking at reviewing that data. That will stay open until September the 6th, so you got 1 month for review. Then we get into the accountability data. Those dates aren't, we don't have specific dates on that, but we'd say between the 2nd and 3rd week of September, we're gonna have a QA day somewhere during that time. And by the end of September, the card will be open, and there will be time for an embargo period for both districts to look at all the data in the card, their own, as well as other schools and districts, and also the media to take a look at it before it opens up to the public. So that's kind of the plan. We're really back on the more historical schedule of fall release. But if you have questions, continue to reach out to me, but there are points of contact for each of these different areas that are probably the best points of contact to start with, but I never mind helping. Another thing we want to make sure you know about is for the, I want to mention the question we put out there, and I don't think we had any responses back to it. It was a discussion question.
Right.
If you have some really good best practices out there, help promote what you're doing. That will help somebody else. I'm not going to think of everything here, but do help promote what you're doing as a best practice, and we might get the opportunity to share some of what you're doing in a future webcast, or somebody might see it and be able to maybe develop some of their own best practices from what you're doing.
Dee Dee, you're specifically looking at strategies for data entry.
Data entry.
School by school, and whether
Yeah,
that's a
yeah.
marketing campaign or like a workshop type.
And we know it's done different ways.
Right.
Some districts entered in for every single school.
Yep.
They take control. Others open it up to the principals that are designee to actually enter the data at local level. There are tools within the card to actually look at the data once it's been entered. So nobody should feel like that one person has to enter it all for all the schools.
Right.
So that's really just a local decision on what they prefer. So if you have some best practices for sharing, that'd be great.
And Dee Dee, specifically on the technology related items, there's 10 or so items there. We really want to make sure that as that is even like inventory based questions that's collected at the school level, we really want to make sure that really makes sense at an aggregate district level, so that those numbers and those inventories match,
Right.
correct?
And the only place you're really gonna see those, be able to aggregate those school numbers into the district level is through those collector
Yep.
reports, and being able to pull it that way, because we still do not aggregate that to the district or the state level in the Bright Bites part of the school report card.
Right.
So I want to mention on the Infinite Campus update, your bills are due the middle of August. By the time we meet again, it'll really be probably too late for you to get it processed. So looks like we did have a question out there, and it looks like the majority of you are either have it processed or maybe even already paid. There's still some folks that don't know or know that it hasn't gotten processed yet. We really don't like being in a position of being the collectors on this. It's not something we enjoy doing, and I know sometimes I have to reach out to the KEs to kind of help me towards the end as far as reaching out. But if you just don't know if you've even got the bill, don't hesitate to reach out to us. We can get you a copy of the bill and make sure it gets processed. We did have a very successful training. We had almost 200 people registered to the training last week, so we appreciate your efforts to help educate the people within your schools and districts of the training, and make sure folks are participating in the pieces of it that are important to them. And then we do want to also thank you for the data visualization. Some of you have maybe helped us find some contacts that are on the data visualization work group. We had our first meeting this month, and did get some valuable feedback, and plan on moving that work forward along with that feedback and some KDE initiatives too. So that's all I really have. So I want to turn it back over to you.
Okay. All right, Phil, I think you had a couple items you wanted to mention.
I just really want to, in support of what Bob was talking about, the electronic criminal activity and the fraud and stuff, all that stuff is real. That's not stuff that we're just thinking might happen. That stuff has actually happened. We've had successful phishing attempts, successful data breaches, and we've had the fraud where people have really been creative about, fooling people and tricking people into, they end up with a lot of money is basically what they end up with. So I think it's important that we be diligent and we be very proactive. In light of that, we're in the process right now of upgrading our firewall software, which is something that the KEs are working with the districts. And we have to do that in a certain order, so we just can't say, well, we want to do a district, at the end of the month, and that'd be more convenient. We have to do these in kind of groups, and we have to finish those before we can start another group. So, but that software update is really, really important, and us being diligent and proactive, so that we may make sure we have a really good, clean network, Mike, like you described, and make sure we have a good secure network that goes along with the importance of keeping that network up. So,
Absolutely.
and then I guess the second thing I have is sometime at the end of this month, I don't know exactly the date, we're going to be switching and moving to a 200 gig interface for our internet service
For K-12.
for K through 12.
What are we at
And
right now, Phil?
We're at 80.
Wow.
We're at 80. So we're going to be moving to 200, and
That's awesome.
and we think, we don't know, we're trying to get some data that's probably one of the largest organizational internet connections, around. I don't know, maybe in the top 5 or something. So hopefully we'll get some more data on that. We'll be able to report on that. Not to be bragging on it, but we're still being responsible in doing that.
So we're going from an 80 gig pipe to a 200.
To a
So,
200.
so I think it's important though, just in the area of being responsible, to make sure folks understand what that means. Because we're going to and you did say, the interface.
Mhm.
We're
The
we're
interface,
moving to
right.
an interface that allows that capacity
Okay.
to
Sure.
occur. We're not all of a sudden going to go from using 80 gig to using 200
Right.
gig.
No.
Right.
And we're not all of a sudden paying for 200 gig when we were paying for 80 gig or
Right.
anything like that. And that's why I want to speak
Sure,
back to the
sure.
responsibility here. It is just, and it really is kudos out to everybody involved, our partners involved, in being insightful and saying, we want to make sure that we're making the appropriate infrastructure adjustments and things.
Yeah, sure.
And we're creating that avenue by which that, that availability is there, so that as we continue to grow in use and so forth, we don't bump our head.
Right.
We don't,
Sure.
we don't end up having a pipe that's not big enough to handle where we're going.
That interface really gives, and that infrastructure gives us the ability to grow close to a terabyte of internet access, really kind of on the fly
when needed.
when needed.
Yeah.
I mean, it's just a matter of adding a port, so it's not a real big deal like it's been before. So
Okay.
interesting.
Good deal. Good to be aware of. So I was going to mention real quickly, David had a point on the agenda he had sent out about the Education Week magazine. So I would just point people to look at that, and some good information available in there about how we're addressing and identified 5 big challenges around that EdTech leaders are facing. So again, I will just reference that. I don't, you comment on
Just
that?
all five of those
Mhm.
are heavily influenced and referenced in our CATS master plan
Yep.
area of emphasis. And just to point out, 3, 4, and 5, if you're looking at the agenda that we sent out, are really heavily linked, tying to leveraging data to drive instruction, making sure that we look at data in a way that it becomes actual information to where we can make decisions, and then improving what we're doing with from a teacher and leader professional learning perspective, so that we maximize the effective use of EdTech. And if I can, real quick shout out today, there's a KY Go digital event at Moorhead, so there's hundreds of folks actually moving on these items today. And then there are 3 more of those, including a teach meet at the end of next week, and then there's multiple events throughout the rest of the summer that we have left, the few weeks that we have left. So.
Good deal. Any other questions that we had submitted? Did any of y'all see any? Okay.
There's one out there, Mike,
Okay.
and I'll probably take that offline, okay? But something I just want to go ahead and give a shout out to and a forecast of. There's 2 great big freight trains coming at people right now.
Yeah.
They need to be aware of. And right now the light's off in the distance, but it's coming, okay? One of them is all about what I'm going to call interoperability, and it's really about, the end user's efficiencies and ease of access to their stuff. And the other's about information security that you keep hearing Bob Hackworth over here talking about. Those 2 are coming at you, and they're going to collide. So that question really that's on Ghost Soapbox
In a
right
good
now.
way. They're
In a
gonna
good way.
collide.
In a good way. We're really going to be pushing hard And
this
Phil,
is about single sign-on.
it's about single sign-on, but it's about
It's
single
about-
sign-on, it's about MFA, it's about SSO, it's about all these things that we need to put in place. And Phil, we're gonna go from, you talked about due diligence. You know, Bob and I were talking, we talk about this all the time. We've been making recommendations for years, best practice stuff, but at some point in time, this is gonna get to you gotta do it.
Gotta do
Okay?
it, yeah.
You gotta be able to integrate your applications together, okay? You gotta be able to minimize and be able to, the login attempts, you've gotta be able to secure your information as well as make sure that that experience is a good one.
Yep.
So all this stuff's coming at you, you're gonna hear a whole lot more about it. Bob's got a committee that's pulled together of people that's gonna really help us understand strategically how to move things. But I'm telling you, it's coming, right, Marty?
That's right.
It's coming. So,
All right, so a couple of reminders. Obviously, we talked a lot, spent quite a bit of time on our information we're provided to the state board. I encourage every district to be familiar and aware of that information. It is, again, a very important part of us maintaining our program, driving our program forward, and being able to operate. And then the notice, the proposed rulemakings from the FCC. If you got some comments, feedback, get those to us by the end of the week so that we can include your thoughts in our overall response for Kentucky K through 12. Our webcast next month is going to be shifted because of some conflicts, so it will be shifted to August the 27th instead. That's the fourth Tuesday of the month instead of the third Tuesday of the month. So August the 27th, and we will actually be at Grayson County Schools. So we're going to try to get back out to where we're doing these from some district locations. So we look forward to visiting at Grayson County Schools next month on the 27th. And in the meanwhile, you all give us a shout as needed, and we'll try to keep our communication open to you all in between now and our next webcast. Thanks, everybody.